Good morning and good afternoon. Sorry to keep everyone waiting. Happy Tuesday. A couple of weeks after ISC West. I really appreciate everyone spending a few minutes with us today. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Today, the whole purpose of today is we're discussing social media. We're going to focus mostly on the organic elements of it, but we'll also spend a few minutes on paid ads as well. And once again, I really would love for any questions that you have, because I'm going to try and get through the prepared remarks as quickly as possible today. And as time permits, we'll get through that of as many questions. And what I also will state is how do I say this? Feel free to not wait till the end with that of your questions. I would greatly appreciate it. And let me just take a quick peek at. Okay. And Isabella, can I ask you for a favor to ask someone on the team to turn on the AC? I would appreciate that. Thank you. Okay. So with that said, just really quickly, because today is not about us, but it's funny. To this day, we've been around for 14 years. I can't believe it's been 14 years already. And once in a great while, we get asked, well, Dave, I know you guys do marketing, but what do you do? So I'll be really, really brief about this. We're a marketing agency for the industry. We only work with security companies. In fact, the entire ecosystem, from guard companies to alarm dealers, fire alarm companies, integrators, and even the vendors that support them. And as you can see here, we're proud members of many of the industry's biggest associations. Obviously, we need to add to this in terms of some of the local state-based associations as far as I'm concerned, but we're really proud about that. And in terms of the things that we do, we help with mostly digital marketing, so websites, social media, email, digital ads, search engine optimization, those types of things. But really what's unique about us is we have a nationwide network of groups that we work with, whereas they don't compete. And it's all about the current level of success. So in other words, we're not getting started off in the ground level, but we're getting started off with what's working best. So enough about that. What I will say, by the way, in the chat, if in the last 30 or 60 days, you've gotten a call or an email from Isabella, type a 1 in the chat. I get emails from Isabella every day, of course. And I know, once again, some of you are going to be referencing to everyone, and some of you are, I appreciate the fact that a lot of you are sending notes directly to me. What I will say about Isabella is, Isabella, and by the way, for those of us at ISC West that came by our booth, you were able to meet Isabella in person, but, Isabella, very, very appreciative of, well, when I say for you, I know I'm singling you out, but for the entire group here. But Isabella, part of her responsibility is to reach out to each of you, as you register RSVP for the webinar, to make sure that you've got this in your actual calendar, as you're interested in learning more about how we can help. She can help schedule those appointments. What I will say is this QR code here, if you'd like to see as to how we can help grow and market, build your brand, and drive more inbound leads for that of your security company, use this QR code or reach out directly to Isabella to get your meeting scheduled. So let's see here. Eric states, will you touch on how much exposure can come organically with the current social media algorithms that seem to be prioritizing advertising? So Eric, that's a really good question. Maybe I'll touch base on this briefly right now, and I'll also touch base because this is a really big and deep question. In terms of what I will say here is the social platforms generate the lion's share of their revenue. Obviously, they've diversified their risk in terms of where they generate revenue from, but a big portion of their revenue comes from advertising. So to Eric's point, the ads are in fact forcing that of getting our content in front of the intended audience. And I'm going to speak to that a little bit more directly here. What I will say, Eric, and I'll touch base, because to me, this is a really good question. This could be a question that we could spend 20 to 30 minutes on and go back and forth on. But what I will say is this: focus your efforts on methodical, and I won't say who, but one of my good friends here, I believe we just had a conversation yesterday about this in the morning. When I say one of my colleagues, well, I shouldn't say colleagues, one of my good friends / groups that we work with, I believe that you're on, if my memory serves me correct. I mentioned this yesterday during a meeting that we had. It's like methodical and steady marketing wins the race. So Eric, getting back to your question, it is important to make sure that we are providing high value content Number one. Number two, and I don't mean just come buy from me, come buy from me, come buy from me, but information. And I'm going to walk you through a number of different types of content that will actually be super helpful and things in that regard. The other thing that I'll take into consideration is, make sure that we, you want to make sure that you're being consistent with that of your content. You want to make sure that it's called social media for a reason. So even if you're only working with commercial, or if you're in the channel and you're on the vendor side and you're working with out of dealers, integrators, et cetera, guard companies, et cetera, you want to make sure that you're keeping things light and social and don't just be all meat and no potatoes, if that makes sense. So I'm going to get into more detail about this, Eric, but that's a really good question. And once again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to interject that. I believe most of us, we're probably already connected. But I literally we just got back from ISC West. We just got back from that of SN. I just literally got back a week ago from SNDA. It was an absolutely incredible conference. I was very blessed and honored to speak at both of those. We had very lively groups and things in that regard. What I will say is, if we're not connected on LinkedIn, I'd love to connect on LinkedIn and keep this conversation going. The one thing I'll just finish with is the things that we're discussing today are based on the current level of success, based on all of the knowledge that we possess and things that are working for the groups that we're working with, as well as even groups that we just happen to be friends with that we know that aren't working, and they share their successes with us and things in that regard. So the things that I'm going to be talking about, I will be talking about some of the things by the numbers, but we'll get into some specific examples here as well. So before we get started, I would love to give a big thanks to that of our great friends at Recognize. Recognize is today's sponsor for that of the webinar. And I'll be really brief, but for those of us that, I guess a question for that of the audience, and feel free once again to send it directly to me. You don't have to send this to everyone unless you feel comfortable doing so. But if you're familiar with Recognize, can you type 2 in the chat? And if you're not familiar with Recognize, type 3 in the chat. I appreciate that. So, okay, so I do see a few 2s. I see a number of 2s. I do see a couple of 3s that are coming in as well. Well, we'll be really brief about this. If you are working with commercial end users, even for the residential end user as well, but you do video surveillance, which I'm not going to ask, but I would imagine that's all of us. Recognize as someone you want to take into consideration. It's wireless outdoor intrusion detection with baked with AI-based visual verification. And where I'm going with this is, if you take a look at the screen here, these are some of the core products that are part of their entire ecosystem. And as I mentioned, obviously AI, we're going to touch base on AI from the marketing application here shortly. But keep in mind, they're filtering that of the nuisance or the false alarms and integrating with that of the lion's share. I believe if they're not with every single monitoring center, the wholesales and the installations, with the lion's share of them, so that you're able to generate high value RMR. Because remember, the dirty word in our industry is attrition. And as we layer additional services, it puts us in a position to deliver more value, generate more high value RMR, and then lower the attrition. In other words, we're keeping our customers for a longer period of time. So what I will say is this QR code will take you directly to Recognize's website. If you'd like to learn more about them, I would greatly appreciate you letting them know that your good friends at SD Marketing sent you. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, we're going to talk about our landscape, the social landscape for that of our industry in that of 2025. We're going to be talking about building that of your conversion focused strategy. We'll talk about how to leverage AI. We're going to touch base on this because we're not going to be able to get too deep into this today. And also keep in mind automation, because remember, it's like, how do we do more with less? And how do we do it efficiently and effectively? We'll talk about measuring what matters most, because remember, what gets measured is really, really important. We'll talk about that of the ROI framework. And then going back to what Eric mentioned a few minutes ago, we'll talk about that of paid social advertising as well, and some of the differences between organic and that of paid ads. So once again, I think that we all know that we'd like to keep this really interactive. And for those of you that have been on sessions before, I only have 3 questions. I have 2 now and then 1 a little later in today's session. But if you can, what's your biggest challenge with social media marketing? Is it creating consistent content, finding time to manage accounts, converting followers to leads, measuring ROI, or is it other, and specify in the chat? So if you scan this QR code, if you scan this QR code, then click on the actual, what is most difficult for you. I'd greatly appreciate that. We'll give this just a moment. And by the way, on a side note, I really appreciate that of everyone sharing their thoughts on this. Keep in mind, and we'll keep this up for another 5 seconds or so, but I'd really like for everyone to answer these questions honestly. And the reason why I'm asking everyone to answer these honestly is because I'd like for you to compare, how did you respond to this? And how does that compare to others? So really quickly, we can see here there's a diverse number of answers. Converting followers to leads. Obviously, that's really important from the sales perspective. Creating consistent content is number 2, measuring ROI, and then even finding time to manage accounts. I'll tell you what, time is our worst enemy, and I can completely relate to that. So let's move on to the next question. I really appreciate everyone engaging with us. So we can answer this second question. How effectively do you believe your social media efforts are at currently generating leads? Now, ironically, I may have known that that was going to be the number 1 answer here, but if you can, once again, answer this in terms of minimally, very, somewhat not effective, or we're just getting started, that would be greatly appreciated. And once again, we'll give this just another moment or so. I appreciate everyone providing feedback. And I see here the lion's share, so like nearly half, is minimally effective, rare leads from social media. Well, I'll tell you what, that's much better than the second runner-up, not effective, no measurable leads from social. Well, the good news is you are in the right place, and I really appreciate everyone expressing their thoughts and feedback here. And keep in mind, I don't know who answers what. This is all anonymous. So I appreciate everyone's feedback. Okay, so let's jump into things. So when we talk about that of the security specific social media landscape in 25, as we're getting started with this, let's start off with like how social has evolved, over the years for that of our industry or security companies. And I'll tell you what, in the couple of slides before, whereas we'd referenced the fact that we're generating like 0 or we're not able to measure any leads. What I will say is, even if we go before this from brand awareness to lead gen to lead generation engine, there has been a huge shift in even the utilization and the adoption. We've been around for 14 years, and I've seen that of how, as an industry, we have evolved. And what I will say is, keep in mind that social is, by the way, I will say this, even though we're going to be talking about KPIs here in just a few minutes, it is very difficult to measure. And I say this because, remember, we are bombarded by hundreds and hundreds of ads every single day. and keep in mind, because of the fact that, and I know it's hard to see me, but because of the fact of this device here, I'm talking about the mobile phone for those that weren't able to really see that. In whether it's television, whether it's online, whether it's social, whether it's email, whether it's on websites, et cetera, we're bombarded by things. And the key here is, it is important to be omnipresent and to have that omni-channel approach. And keep in mind, this is where, and I know with some of the groups that we work with, we have these conversations about how, when we get into like an attribution model, or what do we attribute this lead to, it's basically, it can be all of the above or many different channels. So what I will say is, first things first is we've got to make, we have seen a much bigger adoption rate. And we also have, this has helped to, when we say brand awareness, I'm talking about not just showing your logo, but showcasing what you stand for. What is our value prop? Like, how are we, unique in things in that regard? The other thing is, AI has really helped and changed everything. I will say this, I'm not, look, we use AI. We use AI every single day, but by the way, we're going to talk about this in just a few minutes. It's not an easy button. Like, we get really deep and very comprehensive with that of AI, and it's not just for that of creating content and management, but also from the research perspective, from the scheduling perspective, from the idea perspective, not just from creating the content. I'd already mentioned that of the adoption rate. And the other thing to take into consideration, and I won't say that this is, when I say this has evolved, I think that there's more of a maturity in our industry in terms of knowing that certain AI platforms are more geared towards that of the end users that we work with. And I'm talking about more specifically from the organic perspective. Uh, and Eric states here, I've also found that other marketing effectives to be minimally effective. Well, Eric, I will say this. I don't disagree with what you're saying, but what I will say is the number one marketing channel that we see is omni-channel, as I just referenced a couple of minutes ago. And I will also say this, some of the marketing channels, when they're on their own, they're not as effective as if you're adding and layering additional channels together. Keep that in mind. We'll touch base a little bit more in detail. Okay, so I'm going to not reference who stated this, but specifically throttling of company page or company page-based content on LinkedIn and Facebook specifically. Yeah, I agree with what you're referencing. I mean, here's the thing. It is, remember, and we're going to touch base on this a little bit more in detail. You want to make sure that you are being consistent and providing the value. That is part of the key. And by the way, is this going to be, like that of, not that I'm on TikTok or this Instagram or what have you, but like you get into some of these social platforms when you have tens of thousands or like with what we do, it's not quite as sexy as some other industries. So we're not going to get quite the same engagement as others. But the key here is it's all about targeted impressions in front of the right audience. Because remember, it takes 20, 30, 40, 100 or hundreds of times to be able to get someone's attention. And we want to make sure that we keep staying consistent in things in that regard. Keep in mind when we take into consideration that of the platforms, and I realize that we have individuals from the entire ecosystem that are on today's webinar, that are on live, and that will be watching this on demand. But in terms of groups that work with Resi, and I'm specifically talking about organic, we want to focus more so on the Instagram and Facebook. Although LinkedIn is definitely something that I would still highly recommend, even if you're not working with any commercial end user customers, because keep in mind, and remember, it is important to be consistent. I don't mean to keep repeating myself, but consistency and value is so important. Now, for most of us, and I know I didn't ask, but as I was just taking a look at some of the individuals that are on live, most of us are going to either exclusively focus on either B2B, meaning we're on the vendor side to that of the dealer integrator, or we happen to be a commercial security company working with commercial end users, or that's a mix of what we're working with. So I'll focus more of my efforts here. This is where I'll tell you what, besides, I'll share with you really quickly, like for us, where we generate the lion's share of our leads are going to be from the events. So this is going to be like ISC West, like an SMDA that we just came back from, or like a webinar from today as an example. And then behind that is going to be Facebook ads and Facebook/Instagram ads. I'll talk about that in just a few more minutes, but organically, beyond that, it's going to be LinkedIn. And keep in mind, it's not necessarily just LinkedIn is the driver of this, but it is a part of that sales cycle. Because keep in mind, if, as we all know, if we're working with that of the residential end user, the sales cycle can be very short, right? It can be like a one-call close, so to speak. Whereas for those of us that are working with B2B or with commercial end users, as an example, the sales cycle can be weeks, if not months, and in some cases years. And this is where all of the social platforms, obviously I know today we're focused on that of social media, can really be helpful, because keep in mind, what you want to do is make sure that you're connecting. And I know one of the questions that I always get asked, well, look, Facebook and Instagram, that's more for friends and family as opposed to LinkedIn. The mindset's very different. Is it okay to connect with others? But I will speak for myself, and I will speak from what I know from others. I'm not here to tell you exactly what to do. I'm here to be more of a guide and allow you to make this your own, if that makes sense. For me, I realize, I'm one of the leaders of our business. I don't really spend a lot of time personally on Facebook. I really don't have an Instagram. I do connect with, friends and family on Facebook, as well as that of individuals in the industry. I don't really spend a ton of time on Facebook in that regard. But what I will say is, Facebook and LinkedIn are huge key components. For me personally, I am okay with doing that. Each of you will have to make this decision on your own. But to me, anywhere where you can be in a position to strengthen your relationship with that of your existing customers, as well as with new prospects, you can't go wrong. And even if, Yeah, now look, obviously, if you're horsing around and doing things maybe that you wouldn't want others to see, well, okay, maybe that's a little different, right? But you know, I would highly recommend for you to do so. And obviously with LinkedIn, I think for those of you that know me well, you know how big of a proponent I am on LinkedIn. And by the way, with LinkedIn, it is not just about posting, it's about engaging with others. And I'll speak about that here momentarily. So let's take a look at some of the numbers. So on a monthly basis, there are over 310 million active users. And of those 310, 300 of them are engaging regularly. And that could be with either posting content or liking or commenting, reposting, sharing, those kinds of things. And keep in mind, about a quarter of LinkedIn users are interacting with content on a daily basis. And about half the users check in at least weekly. From the B2B marketer perspective, about 9 out of 10 B2B marketers reference that, or they're using or utilizing LinkedIn for helping with that of lead gen. And over half, so I would say 3 out of 5, states that it generates high quality leads. And let's talk about why. You know, I obviously there's a lot of stats that I didn't include on this that I could have included this, but generally speaking, the average income of the average LinkedIn user is incredibly high. I don't recall off the top of my head if it's over like 70 to 100,000 here, here in the US market. Generally speaking, the LinkedIn users are decision makers for that of their respective, whether it's for their business or obviously for their household as well. And I want to spend just a little time here in terms of this last bullet. And by the way, I know that I need to practice what I'm preaching and be more consistent with creating content as well as engaging with others. But I do my best, and I'm very blessed and fortunate to have the team here that helps me with a lot of these posts that are pushed out. But keep in mind, about 1% of LinkedIn users create content frequently. And what I want to challenge each and every single one of you that are watching this live, and that are, we're not going to get into too much detail in this today, but for those of us that are watching this live and that'll be watching this on demand, for those of us that are watching this live, I would love for you to type me in the chat if you are going to make a commitment to posting once per week. Because if you post once per week, guess what? You are in the top 1% of LinkedIn users. And I think, Marnelli, you raised your hand, so I believe that means that you as well. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Dave, already me, I love that, love that. I'm not going to reference everyone by name, but thank you all. And I know a number of you are sending me private notes as well, so I really appreciate that. I tell you what, and I don't want to spend too much time on this. Yes, love that already. And love that. And Scott, 1 to 3 times per week. I love that. And look, I tell you what, team, it is not that difficult, especially with what we're going to talk about here over these next few minutes, in order to achieve that. And by the way, I don't mean you can literally spend an hour or 2 a month and plan out all of your months or your week's content and be able to have these things scheduled and things in that regard. So let's talk about Facebook, for example. With Facebook, nearly 3/4 of internet users are regular Facebook users. And this is by 2027 expected to be over 3 out of 4. There's a massive diverse user base. And by the way, remember, Facebook is not just for the residential end user, it's for B2B or commercial as well. We're going to dig a little deeper in that in just a few minutes. Also, keep in mind, Facebook is the most popular channel for customer care amongst that of millennials, Gen X, and even boomers. And this is thanks to that of features like messengers, groups, events, and things in that regard. It's not obviously as B2B centric as LinkedIn, but with creative targeting integration, it can really put us in a great position if that makes sense. And I'm going to talk about that in terms of some of the B2B targeting, because keep in mind, I had mentioned, remember, a couple of minutes ago about how for us, Facebook and Instagram is one of the top drivers of how we generate leads ourselves. I'll touch base on that in just a moment, so stay tuned, because that's going to be towards the end of today's session. With Instagram, I'll tell you what, globally, there's over 1.4 billion monthly users. And there's a huge potential here. And keep in mind, the good news is Instagram is part of Facebook, so part of that of Meta. So there are ways, from the ads perspective, to leverage both platforms at once. Obviously with scheduling tools, which we're going to talk about, as you spend time to create high value content, you can look to deploy across multiple platforms at once. And the big thing that I want to touch base on here is that there's over 25 million businesses that are active on Instagram, excuse me. And once again, I am for those of us that are strictly B2B, I'm not here to state Instagram is where you're going to drive the lion's share of your results, but I'll tell you what, whether you're utilizing, and we're going to talk about Reels here in just a moment. It is just another opportunity because remember, it is all about omnipresence, omnichannel, and getting as many targeted impressions as possible in front of that of your target audience. So let's see here. We've got a few notes here. So let's see here. Paul states to David's points, if you want to generate leads and impressions for marketing and business, personal branding by far is the most important aspect for social media. Yeah, Paul, let me expand upon what Paul meant by that. I think it's, once again, Eric that shared the beginning about the, organic versus paid. And then when we talk about organic, we can segment it into your personal brand. So like, let's use LinkedIn as an example, because the same thing can hold true on Facebook as well. But we'll focus on LinkedIn just for time's sake. So let's say that, we are and by the way, you don't have to be a C-level executive for your company. You don't have to be in business development to be an ambassador of your company. Because even if you're a technician, if you're in support, regardless as to administration, everyone should be an ambassador for that of their business. To me, it's super, super important. And once again, I feel like sometimes we're the shoemaker with kids at home that have the holy shoes or holes in their shoes. But anyhow, neither here nor there. So when it comes to that of your personal brand versus the company brand, keep in mind, generally speaking, when I post from my personal brand, from my personal profile on LinkedIn versus when we post in our company, usually, 9 out of 10 or 9.5 out of 10 times, the personal post will get a lot more impressions and engagement. And this goes back to, back to Eric's first point about organic versus paid. So where I'm going with this is, for those of us that have a much bigger personal brand versus that of the company brand, what you want to do is you're going to want to build both concurrently. And with that said, this is where on both the company and the personal profiles, you can reshare, repost, engage with each other's items, things in that regard. You want to be diverse. And I'm not saying you want to just reshare everything, like post the same thing from both profiles, but you want to make sure you're leveraging both. Like you don't want to just only focus on your personal, and you only don't just want to focus on the company. You want to focus on both, because the personal profiles, once again, 9.5 out of 10 times will get a lot more exposure. So great point, Paul. Appreciate that. Eric stated, where do small business customers fall compared to large commercial customers? Okay, so if I'm understanding your question correctly, and feel free to clarify a little bit here, but where do small business customers fall compared to large commercial customers? So if I'm understanding what you're asking correctly, both are going to be like, because we can look at that from the, let's say, your customer perspective, or if we are a large versus in that regard, the principles are going to remain the same. There are, in fact, of these, and I'm not going to go back to the other slides, but the users are going to be small businesses, medium businesses, and large businesses that are present. Obviously, all of us are present as individuals, but representing both our businesses and our homes. In terms of from the deploying content, from the advertising perspective, what I will say is the small business is able to be a lot more nimble, because we don't have to go through the same legalese and things in that regard. We don't have to, go through all these layers to do things. We also can have a lot more mini targeted from the ad campaigns and things in that regard. So I'm not sure, Eric, let's see. So I think this is going to be, okay, so there's clarification. Which social media channels are SMB customers most likely to engage with other businesses? I mean, the long and the short of it is, I'm not going to state all of them. What I would recommend is, keep in mind, and we'll touch base on this a little bit more. So I'm just going to touch on this, Eric, right now really briefly, and then I'll get into this a little bit more detail when we get into the ad section. But if you have a list of decision makers at the SMBs, I would highly recommend to start off with Facebook and Instagram. That's where you're going to get the biggest ROI. And I'm going to dig a little deeper into that in just a moment. I'm not going to reference you by name, but when posting content when posting content, is it better to post on personal accounts as opposed or as business accounts? So I know I touched base on that already briefly, but what I will say is it's going to be both. Now, keep in mind, some of us may have, from the business perspective, because maybe we're medium and larger businesses, we may have more followers than we do have connections with that of our personal. So there's no one single answer to us. It depends, but generally speaking, you're going to want to do to both. For us, I would say, without me having exact numbers here, I would say probably I have maybe two of the posts that my personal profile versus our company profile, I would say we're probably, maybe about 55 to 65%, of all the posts that come from our company and I'm talking about unique posts. Of all the unique posts that comes from our company versus my personal profile, I would say it's maybe, anywhere from like 55% to about 2/3 are coming on my personal, and then the others are coming from the company. And at times we do actually have similar contents coming from my personal and the company. Keep in mind, we want to, like, I'm going to state the obvious. When it's coming from my personal post, we want to share it from the first party perspective. Whereas if it's coming from like from the company, then it's going to be third party. As an example of that, let's state the marketing of this webinar. When we market this webinar, it's going to be, David is hosting a webinar in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whereas if it's coming from me, it's like join me as an example. So I know that goes without saying, and that's just slight little details and things in that regard. Okay, so, and by the way, I love this interaction. And even if we're going to be a little behind, because some of these things I'll zip through these things, but I love this interaction, and please keep these coming. So Elon, if I pronounce that correctly, Jacob stated, can you talk about government customers? So believe it or not, and I know I use this example with those of us that we work together with, I've shared this with you, or that we've had direct discussions about marketing. I've shared this example with you, but like we've even generated leads from the DoD on Facebook. And for those of you who want a little bit of a funny story about that, I can share a funny story with you about that offline. That's not appropriate for me to share when this is being recorded. I will say this. Keep in mind, if you're selling to the government, generally speaking, you're going to be GSA certified or listed, if I'm saying that correctly. And the marketing is going to be a little different. But what I will say is build your database and by the way, not just for ads. I know we're not talking about email today, but remember, your list is your gold. And you always want to be building your database, because no matter what happens, you always have access to your list of your customers and your prospects. But in terms of the government end users, there are ways, and I don't recall off the top of my head, but I believe there are ways on LinkedIn. So keep in mind, I know I've been focused from the ads on Facebook and Instagram, but keep in mind, with Instagram and Facebook, there are ways to target. One of the ways to target, which I'll just touch base on that really briefly right now, is you can upload a list, and the subscribers that are associated with a contact, that can be a targeted list that you're marketing to, by the way, and I'll touch base on this in just a moment. You're not going to want to expand the audience, or if you do, be very cautious, because I was once again having a conversation with someone yesterday about how the Googles and the Facebooks, and I don't believe we have anyone from LinkedIn or Facebook or Meta on right now. So otherwise, they probably would be giving me the side eye right now. But just this morning, I think we had 1 or 2 calls from Google. And why do you think they're calling? They're calling because they're saying your optimization score is not where it should be, and you need to be spending more money. And I was having this conversation with a good friend yesterday, and we're both joking about the fact that we're okay with not being with being like a 90+% with the optimization score within these ad platforms, because what they're looking for is they want us to spend more money by expanding things that are not going to be driving more conversions. Let's see here. Okay, so Scott, thank you for your question. Do you consider YouTube a separate animal from LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram? So I got to tell you, Scott, so YouTube, first of all, for those that don't know this, the #1 search engine that's out there, and I know AI is changing everything, but today still the #1 search engine is Google. And I'm going to ask this rhetorically. Money, money, money. Yes, yes, yes. Sorry, I'm getting sidetracked here with the chat, but please keep it coming, because I love these points and questions. The #2 search engine out there, I'm not going to ask, but probably you've already guessed it if you didn't already know, and that's YouTube. YouTube is the #2 search engine. So Scott, YouTube, and especially Scott, for what you do, YouTube, because what you do is very visual in nature with that of the remote guarding and things in that regard. And for those of us that, by the way, that are leveraging services and that what we do demonstrates very well with video, obviously remote guarding demonstrates very well. I don't mean to be Captain Obvious here, but it's really, really, how do I say, it's really, really effective. YouTube is, I'll share with you, one of the reasons why we're really big proponents of like a Facebook and Instagram versus a LinkedIn, especially to start. Because keep in mind with LinkedIn, you are able to do some really incredible targeting. So keep in mind for those of us that have like a average, let's say we have the end users that are going to be, how do I say this? The end users are going to be, 50,000, 100,000, $1 million plus. This is where you can justify an average cost per lead in the thousands. And this is where you want to be leveraging LinkedIn as well, if that makes sense. Because I'm not saying you have an unlimited budget, but those opportunities, especially when they're few and far between, you want to make sure you have your targeted impressions. Now, getting back to YouTube, I didn't finish my point here. Facebook and Instagram, you generating what we experience, not just with us, but with the groups that we work with throughout the country. We're seeing a much better ROI from the from the Facebook and Instagram. But to Scott's point, YouTube, so we would consider it separate because it's distinct. It's not a social platform. However, it is a very effective tool. And I say this because the costs to generate, like to ROI, it is definitely something I would Scott, specifically for you, I would definitely highly recommend. And for those of us that are doing remote guarding, especially if we have lists to target, and with some of the keywords, I would definitely highly recommend that, especially as we have that of short, 10 to 15 second clips, video clips that can help get the point across. There's another question, what about X? So X is, what I will say is with X, whether it's organically or paid ads, X is like, first of all, from the organic perspective, if you have an X company page, the amount of time, and I'll actually speak to this in just a moment, whether you're posting to one platform or to 5 or 6 or 7, it's going to take about the same amount of time because these tools make it easy for you. From the advertising perspective, like that of a Facebook and Instagram, it can really, like the costs are going to be a lot less, relatively speaking, for that of LinkedIn. So it is definitely something to take into consideration. What I will say is, for those of you that are managing the ads on your own, don't have big budgets out of the gate. Have very mindful, small, modest budgets. Okay. So let me just move on, but Jacob, I'm going to get to your question here in just a moment in terms of building that of your conversion base. So this is something you may want to take a snapshot of this. And before I get to this, let me take a look at what Jacob just referenced, and then I'll get to this slide here in just a moment. So either now or in the end, is there a specific tone or type of content that you found most successful, either lead gen, engagement, from the reputation perspective in the marketplace? So what I would say, Jacob, is it depends. First of all, here's the thing. Jacob, imagine like if I were attempting to try and be like you or vice versa. That's going to be disingenuous, if I use the right word. And it's going to be able to be noticed by others. So what I will say is, from like each of us in terms of ourselves individually, as well as that of the customers or the companies that we represent, we have our own brand voice and our own brand tone, if that makes sense. And not to get too deep into this, but it's important. Like, for example, if we are all about high volume, low cost things in this, and I'm not saying, by the way, that's bad. Most of the groups that we work with, they want to be amongst the most expensive because they're providing a concierge level of service. But where I'm going with this is the tone or the type of content needs to match our company values. What is our brand voice? What is our brand guidelines? What do we represent? The other big thing, Jacob, and by the way, these are really great questions, great points. But for all of us, we don't want to be going to our social, to our email, to our website, to all of our marketing, and it's almost as if we're accessing or reviewing a different company, if that makes sense. We want to make sure that it is matching our tone. So I hope I hope that this is answering part of your question. The second part of the question is, keep in mind, not going like if our brand tone, I'm just making this up, is like right here, we don't want to go all the way on this side of the spectrum so that we're being inconsistent. But if we're testing things, we always want to be testing things. If that makes sense. Then Jacob, I think some of the things I'm going to cover are going to actually speak a little bit more directly to this. In terms of, and for those of you that have been on sessions before, I always talk about building your topical authority. We want to position ourselves as to the authority in our market. Because remember, most customers, most of the groups that are potential customers for us, they're not in market, they're out of market. And in fact, only 5 or 10% at any given time are going to be in market. In other words, like let's just say, for example, we're selling to hospitals. And let's say in your market, you've got, I'm making this number up, but you've got 100 hospitals. Like at any given time, how many of these hospitals do you think are looking for security guards or an access control system, or that of a fire alarm system as an example? What, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if at most? The point being here is obviously we want to be present for those, and that's where the in-market like Google Ads and SEO comes into place. But this is where social comes into place, and email and other types of things and various ads is to keep us top of mind and position us. And where I'm going with this is we want to make sure that we are creating specialized content that is specifically geared towards each of the segments of the groups that we work with, if that makes sense. Really, really important. Keep these things in mind, because that positions us into who the audience, when I say our audience, our potential customer base knows, likes, and trusts, so that when they matriculate from out of market to in market, rather than them going to Google, and I've got my hat on, that's each and every single one of you, if that makes sense. We want to make sure that that's incorporated here, so that they come to us because they know, like, and trust us. We want to make sure that some of the content we're demonstrating some results, case studies, use cases, testimonials, and it's not just necessarily us speaking about ourselves. We want to make sure that we're also showcasing like the knowledge that because keep in mind, like the knowledge that we possess, it is, how do I say this? It is, we take these things for granted. Our industry is going through a technological revolution. And look, I realize that we're not making changes, we're not doing shiny object syndrome, but there's a lot of changes that are happening. Any partnerships, like all these things, we want to make sure that we're referencing this. And the big thing that I'm saying that I want to emphasize here is consistency. We want to consistently not only push content out, but also engaging with that of industry conversations. For example, for every single time that we post, you should be doing at least 5 to 10, 5 to 15 comments on others' posts. And I'll tell you why. And today's not just about LinkedIn, it's about social altogether. But in the notifications, so for those of us that are active on LinkedIn, you'll notice that you get notification pop-ups on your mobile device. And also when you go into that of when you're in LinkedIn and you go to that of the notifications tab, you're going to see here, and I'm not going to really pay attention to this right now, but you're going to see notifications, including individuals that liked some of your comments or your posts, and or that commented on that. And where I'm going with this is, if you're posting once per week, you're posting once per day or a couple times per week, usually with your first degree connections, you'll be showing up in the notifications. But the way to get in the notifications more often is by engaging with their content. Keep that in mind, not just in LinkedIn, but for the other organic social platforms as well. But it's not just that, it builds the relationships. Because remember, we talked about, especially for those of us that are B2B, it's all about keeping top of mind, if that makes sense. So, all right, I know I'm a little behind schedule, so I'm going to try and pick up the pace here. In terms of some of the content pillars, you may want to take a screen grab of this as well, or take a picture of this. But 5 key content types includes educational security insights. Remember, the things that we take for granted, these are things that we want to be sharing. Also, technology updates and explanations to them, like customer success stories, industry trend analysis, and problem-solving content. And keep in mind, every single time that you're spending time with a customer, they're going to ask you questions. When you get those questions, whether it's yourself, whether it is your technicians or any of your support, jot that down, put that in a repository, because that should be a social post. Every single time you have a customer that's leaving you a review, that should be a social post. And I'm not saying you do them all back to back to back to back, but remember, build a repository of these so that you're not, because remember, time is one of our worst issues, one of our worst enemies. Keep all these things into consideration. The other thing is, of all the technology partners that you're working with, and I'm speaking obviously to the dealer integrators here right now, follow your technology partners, follow some of your peers throughout the country that are not in your markets. Get some ideas around content that you can be pushing out and things in that regard. I'm telling you, and obviously AI can help you with this as well, but as you do this, this is going to put you in a position where you have almost an infinite amount of content to push out there and to put yourself in a position. By the way, I've got an individual that just shared a really good insight stating follow the trade magazines and the associations. That's a actually, I really appreciate you sharing that, because I would have neglected to mention that. With that of the trade magazines, keep in mind, the editorial staff and the publishing groups for each of the magazines, they have done a fair amount of research knowing what are the trends in technology. Keep in mind, whereas they're speaking to us being the channel, these are things that you can use in terms of ideas for content for that of your audience as well. Same thing with that of the associations. And by the way, speaking of the associations, you take into consideration the ISC West of the world, the GSXs, the ESXs of the world. Keep in mind, what are the hot topics that are being discussed? What are the education that are being discussed? And I'm not insinuating that you've got to spend dozens of hours recreating blogs or social posts that are speaking to all of the talks that are being given, but these are all clues. And my point being here is, with all the things that I just shared, it should put you in a position to have an infinite amount, and I mean this literally, an infinite amount of content to be pushed out. In terms of your profile, I'm gonna zip through a few of these because I know we're a little behind schedule here. Keep in mind, do not just for example, in your LinkedIn as an example, you don't want to just put that of, I am the CEO of ABC, of XYZ security company as an example. What you want to do is make sure that you're focusing on that of the client's problems that you're solving and how you help. Because keep in mind, in like a LinkedIn, there is a search element in terms of individuals that are looking for a security integrator as an example, or someone that helps with access control. And as you have those keywords in your headline as well as in your description and throughout that of your profile and in the things that you post, it'll help to make sure you're discoverable. You want to make sure you have strategic call to actions, and ultimately you want to make sure that you're giving away valuable insights in terms of that could be used as a lead magnet, so that once again, when individuals think of you and your company, they're thinking of you as being someone that delivers value. Okay, we have one last question. Just want to make sure that everyone's still with me here. If we can, once again, quickly pull your phones back up. Which AI tools are you currently using for social media? We're going to talk about this briefly here in just a moment. And I appreciate everyone, addressing this really quickly. So content generation tools, scheduling, analytics, none yet, or other, and you could specify in that of the chat. And by the way, feel free to select all that apply. So, because I think this one will be probably more than one. We'll give this just another moment. and unfortunately, we have some that are none yet. Well, I'm going to quickly get to some of these here in just a moment. Okay, we'll give this just another 3, 4, 5 seconds. So scheduling automation. Yeah, I tell you what, if you're not utilizing scheduling and automation tools, you should be, because this is a huge time saver. Obviously, for all of these three, these are huge time savers. Okay, so let's talk about automation here just for a moment. So keep in mind, AI, I'll tell you what, I'm sure that, in the chat, how many of us, because I'm going to do this as well, I'll start this. How many of us have seen this delve into evolving this, empower this? Like, how many of us is like, I'm seeing stuff where it's like someone is being very lazy and just asking, hey, asking AI, chat GPT or what have you, write me a social post on X, Y, or Z. If that's you and you can see that and you've seen that stuff and we're like, shame on this group or this individual that's just not going through this in great detail. Type a me in that of the chat. Yeah, seen it. Gotcha. And I see a bunch of me's that are saying directly to me. I obviously I don't want to embarrass anyone. So I most of you are sending it directly to me, and I will not reference you by name. But yeah, we're all on the same page. And where I'm going with this is like, and look, I'm not talking about 10, 20, 30 years from now. But the thing is, these tools are not meant are meant to not be the easy button, but for those of us that are professionals at what we do, which is all of us, is meant to give you superpowers. And the key here is you've got to leverage that of your industry expertise. And by the way, we are the guide, not the AI tool. We're here to help the guide be our assistant, if that makes sense. And keep in mind, it can be utilized for that of research and some of the first drafts, and then ultimately to help. Because I'll tell you what, I'll speak for myself. It's a lot more challenging for me to stare at a blank screen as opposed to having a few notes and then ultimately augmenting it accordingly, if that makes sense. You want to make sure, to what Eric mentioned a little earlier, we want to make sure that we're maintaining our authentic voice and that of our expertise. There are some specific prompt strategies. What I will say here is this. So whereas I utilized a portion of this, I think a number of you engaged with one of the posts that I submitted, I think it was last week, from a gentleman that I was on a webinar with, and I'm still eagerly anticipating his book. But he shared a prompting framework with me, standing for CRIT. And CRIT stands for context, role, interview, and task. And I'll just quickly share with you about this. So when I say C for context, you want to enter in context. So it's like, for example, what is it, instead of just saying, write a blog or a post on this, give it context, like share with it a little bit about your company, your business, what you're looking to achieve, who your customers are, the values that you stand for. And by the way, instead of manually doing this every time, you want to build frameworks around this so you can copy and paste things into this. In terms of the role, and by the way, I'm just going to touch base on this. I'm not going to get too deep into this. But if you would like to know more about this in an upcoming webinar, I know a few months back we did an AI-based one, but AI is moving a mile a second. I suspect we'll probably do another one before year's end. And if you would like that, feel free to reference that in the chat and to send notes to Isabella and I about that. And we can speed that up in terms of one of the next webinars. In terms of the role, how do you want it to act? Like, for example, if you are let's just say if you are let's say an integrator and you're working with commercial end user customers, the role is you want it to be a B2B security marketing strategist that has a deep expertise in social media or in copywriting, as an example. You want to give it its role. In terms of interview, rather than just asking it to, how do I say this? Rather than just asking for it to, how do I say this? Just move forward, have it ask you one question at a time, or two questions at a time, or three questions at a time, so that it can learn more and make it more authentic and make it more specifically geared towards what you're looking for. And then finish up with, what's the task? What are you looking for it to achieve? Are you looking for a social post? Are you looking for a blog? Are you looking for ideas around a video script, as an example? And be very specific. And then have it go through that process and engage and interact with it and things in that regard. So a couple of the top AI tools, and I'm going to once again zip through this. So a couple of the recommended tools that we would that we would recommend in terms of from content creation, image creation, scheduling, and analytics. And if you'd like a list of this, send a note to Isabella or myself and get you a list of this. But from the content creation perspective, this is where obviously ChatGPT, Jasper, Copy.ai, or Claude come into place. From the image creation perspective, keep in mind with ChatGPT, and I believe, because I have a paid version, I believe this also comes with a free version, but I'm not sure. But with ChatGPT, there's Dolly, and it's getting much better in terms of things, but also Canva can be very helpful for this. Adobe Express can be helpful for this, and then Pictochart. From the scheduling tools, and I know a number of you are already utilizing this. By the way, for those of you that are utilizing scheduling tools, if you can put that in the chat for everyone, that would be great. And if you don't want your name, I'll list them as to what you share, so that we can share the ones that you use as well. But a couple that I'd recommend are going to be like Hootsuite, Buffer, Sprout Social, and also Later. There are many others. I'm not going to reference you by name, but OneUp was also referenced. I'm not familiar with them, but this individual recommends them, so that's great. In terms of some analytics tools, obviously like Google Analytics 4, Sprout Social Analytics, HubSpot, BrandWatch, Hootsuite Impact. These are a few things to take into consideration. By the way, I'm not going to reference you by name, but there's an individual, and it's a really good point. So be careful with image creation that involves people's faces. There's legal risk out there. So yeah, 100% agree with that. That's a really good point. Obviously, we're not attorneys, nor do we play one on webinars, but you want to keep into consideration any and all trademark issues and things in that regard, obviously with people's faces and things in that regard. So, all right, I know that we're coming up here towards the end. I've got a few slides still to go through. I'm going to skip through this. A couple of things to take into consideration is your automation process. Keep in mind, with that of these scheduling tools, you want to make sure that you're creating a calendar. So this is where you want to do things in bulk, and maybe like once a month or once a week. Put some thought around getting your list of your repository of all the ideas and investing in building all these out using your favorite scheduling tool. Keep in mind, there's a response, well, the big thing here, and I mentioned this earlier, is you don't want to just be individually posting to all of them, especially if you have issues with time. Because like, for example, with like a Hootsuite or a HubSpot as an example, you can connect all of your third-party social platforms, and you basically post once and you check a box that states to post them across the board, across all of them. But all things being equal, you would want to be creating separate social posts that are specifically geared around each social platform. But I will say this, I don't believe most, if not all of us, are going to be that sophisticated in things in that regard. I don't think that we need to take that into consideration. The other thing is with lead capture, you can utilize third-party tools like that of Zapier as an example, and even have things post directly to your CRMs. You can have things automatically trigger not just emails, but you can have them trigger even text messages and things in that regard for any leads that come through. Perfect. Yeah, this individual just referenced they use Zapier as well. Great, thank you. So in terms of ROI, and I'm going to zip through a few of these things. So I know we're already getting a little low with time here, but a couple of things to take into consideration is make sure that you're analyzing that of your data. So in other words, how many impressions? Impressions is the number of times that your social posts or your ads were actually shown. We want to make sure that you are measuring what is the actual cost per the effective cost per qualified lead. And measure, like, because once again, like, and I think Eric, you had alluded towards this in the beginning, some of the topics are going to get more engagement than others. And as you measure that, you're going to know that those are the things you want to focus more so on. For those of you, by the way, that need to hop off because you've got another scheduled meeting, I completely understand. I'm going to keep going for just a few more minutes, and I'd love for you to catch the rest of this on the replay. But for those of you that are able to stay, I'd love for you to stick around, and we'll zip through this as quickly as possible. In terms of this, and I'm going to actually skip through this, a couple of things to take into consideration. UTM. So there is, if you do a search on Google for UTM Builder, that's basically allows you to get a special tracking URL. So in your Google Analytics, you can track what leads are coming from what particular location, whether it's from email, from which specific email, from social, from which social platform, etc. So you want to make sure that you're leveraging these to help you with that of being able to identify where your leads are coming from. Obviously, you want to make sure that you're optimizing landing pages based on conversion rate data and things in that regard. And I'd already touched base on this, but ideally, some of the CRMs and some of the more progressive CRMs, like a HubSpot or like a Salesforce, as an example, you can have lead scoring. So as individuals are engaging with particular things, it puts you in a good position. And then ultimately, from the reporting perspective, you want to have reports that are being automatically pushed out to you, whether it's weekly or monthly, and not just for social, but across the board. In terms of paid social, a couple of things that I just want to point out really quickly is, and going back to what Eric had mentioned in the beginning of the discussion, keep in mind, whereas organically we have limited exposure besides that of the lucky viral few, we can basically force our content to get pushed to that of our targeted audience. And there's measurable results. And the good news is this can happen very, very quickly. Now, keep in mind, in terms of targeting, there's a number of different types of targeting. I'm going to start from the right and go left. So we can target geographically. So those of us that are integrators, we can target according to that of our geographic territory. And literally, we can even target to that of the zip code or cities or counties or the entire state, or for those of us that are nationwide, on a nationwide basis. We can target based on interests. We can target based on demographics, i.e., by age, by sex, things in that regard. We can do custom and lookalike. So I'm gonna actually segment these. The custom audience, like for example, on LinkedIn, you can state that you want to target chief security officers, security directors, security managers of of like a type of industry. You can do it by job type. You can do it by industry. Like there's a number of ways that you can target. Because keep in mind, for LinkedIn, all of our profile, LinkedIn knows all these KPIs, all these data points, and that allows for a specific custom targeting. Whereas like with a Facebook, Instagram, and even like a Google or a YouTube as an example, you can upload lists of your audiences and things like email addresses, things like phone numbers, etc. Like, and there's other things as well that can be a custom target audience. Now, the lookalike audience, what that does is, like, for example, it will take into consideration that custom audience, and it will basically expand that audience by using its AI and its automation tools. What I will say is we don't see a lot of good results from this, but if you are not having a large enough database to be able to market, and it is an extremely valuable end user market as an example, you may want to consider that. But what I will say is proceed with caution. Don't spend thousands of dollars to realize you're getting the wrong audience, is my point. And then the same thing holds true with like behavior based on what, like what individuals are engaging with other, types of content and or, other types of brands and things in that regard. So my point being here is, whereas we talked about how there are, millions, hundreds of millions, or even billions of users, we want to target a very small percentage of a small percentage of a small percentage, which still happens to be representative of a big number, but we want to be very methodical about who we're targeting. The good news is with the advertising, we're able to do so. The other thing is from the ads, there's different types of ads that we can do, from like an image, and all of these, by the way, will include like headline and content and text and things in that regard. We can have like a single image, we can have a video, we can have a carousel, we can have reels, and by the way, stories and reels, and not just now, but over the last 12 plus months, are even organically are getting a lot of reach. So keep this in mind. And I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine about that of the like story and reel type videos, via text message actually yesterday. The other thing, and this is what we primarily focus on, is the lead form ads, because once again, while someone is scrolling through their feed without them having to leave the social platform, they're able to engage with your content and fill out a form. I'm going to actually skip through a few of these so I can show you what I'm talking about. I'll show you the actual form. So here's an example of what I mean by this. So imagine you're scrolling through, let's say, I'm not going to play the video because we don't have time for this right now. And as you want to click on the button that says learn more, what will happen is you can easily fill in your information, click continue, go through the through that of the privacy policy, click submit, and then all of a sudden that lead within just seconds or moments can either be emailed, integrated into your CRM, and or even text message to you. What I will say with these kinds of leads, whether they're on Facebook or Instagram or even LinkedIn as an example, you're going to want to make sure that you're following with them ASAP. And I'm talking about literally, if you can, within seconds. Because keep in mind, if you don't follow up with them within 24, 48 hours, they're going to forget that they even filled out this form. And you're going to want to follow up with them often. That's really, really important, because they didn't go to like Google and say they're looking for a access control company near me, as an example. It's very different. So, as we're wrapping up here, keep in mind, you want to make sure you set a budget. And if this is the first time you're doing it, set it, even if you're doing $5 to $10, $5 to $15 a day and running this for a week or two or three, you can set budgets that are very modestly, even for just a few $100s, and see as to where you are and learn from that. And in terms of how you pay for this, this is on a cost per click or CPC or a, and you know what, that's my mistake for actually a typo there. It should be CPM, which stands for cost per milli. So meaning for every 1,000 impressions that you have, it is you're paying a fee for that of showing your ads. So once again, you can, in terms of what's better, I believe we usually are going to be in a CPM basis, but you can do things in a cost per click as well. Usually things are going to even themselves out, but as you're doing testing, you can see as to what works better for you in terms of what your effective cost per lead is, if that makes sense. Remember, you've got to make sure that you're measuring everything in terms of what are the engagements. And by the way, when you're split A/B testing, you want to see as to which ads are doing better. Here's an interesting tip for you, by the way, is with the organic posts that you're using, the ones that are going to do better organically are going to do better in the ads, just FYI. So if for those of you that don't work with a marketing agency and you're getting started off with this, you may want to, over time, post a half dozen organic type things that you intend to do in advertising, see as to which are the one or two that do the best, use those in your ads because those are going to have a much better engagement and ultimately, conversion rate, things in that regard. You want to make sure you're measuring what's the reach and the impressions. The reach is the number of the unique individuals that you're reaching. The impressions are the total number of times that your ad is being seen by your target audience. You want to make sure you're tracking what's the CTR stands for the click-through rate. In other words, for every 100 times your ad is shown, how many times is it engaged with, right? And usually it's going to be a little bit below 1, but when you have good targets, that's where you're going to be in like the 1 to 3, 1 to 5% CTR perspective. And then the conversion rate, and ROAS stands for return on ad spend. What is the conversion? What's the percentage of engagements and then also conversions? And then the ROAS or the ROAS is what is the return on your ad spend? And as we're wrapping up here, in terms of some of I think I may have briefly touched base on this earlier, but there are insights. You want to make sure you have the various tags from LinkedIn, from Google, from that of Facebook, and even Instagram on that of your ads, on your website, so that you're able to have that 360 review of the various analytics and things in that regard. In terms of the action steps, and as we wrap up here in the next minute or so, make sure that you're auditing that of all of your platforms to make sure that they're aligned, not just with your target market, but want to make sure that they're consistent with the visual and the messaging. You want to make sure that you're implementing that authority amplifier framework that we talked about. And that's where I'd ask you to take a snapshot of a few things a little earlier in terms of the types of content, where I'd mentioned that you can have an infinite amount of content to be able to push out. You want to make sure that you're creating that of a creation workflow. You want to make sure you're tracking specific metrics and create that of a lead magnet. That's something that is of high value that others would be able to give information for in order to receive that. What I will say is, once again, let's stay connected. And I want to quickly, as we're wrapping up, just announce that of our next discussion. Our next webinar is going to take place on May 22nd, which is going to be a little after that of our next event. And by the way, speaking of our next event, live in person, I look forward to seeing each and every single one of you at the California Alarm Association, as well as that of ESX coming up here in June. So CA is going to be in May, and then ESX is in June. So look forward to seeing each of you there. We're going to get really deep into how to use video to build your brand and drive leads. So I'd love for each and every single one of you to schedule an RSVP for that of our next event on May 22nd. I really, really appreciate everyone's time. I know that we went over. I apologize for that, but I think I really love the engagement that we had today. If anyone has any burning questions, I'm happy to address those. But otherwise, we can wrap things up here shortly. Once again, big thanks to everyone, and I appreciate all the kind comments that are being sent to me directly. And Marnelli, thank you. Discussion was awesome. Oh, well, that's very kind of you. And appreciate everyone that's sending their kudos to me directly as well. It's very, very kind. I really look forward to seeing each and every single one of you at an upcoming industry event. Anything that we can help with in the interim, any feedback, even if it's constructive. Okay, even if it's constructive, we're okay with that, because we work really hard on them, and it's not just me, it's the team. So big thanks for my team for helping to put this stuff together, for helping to put these together. And until next time, make it a great day. I look forward to seeing you soon.